there was a bit of discussion about Blender in the previous Creators Most Wanted, so this was to be done for Halloween, but obviously we've missed Halloween because Halloween was yesterday. But what we're going to do today, if we get time, is to make this witch's cone in Blender. And what we shall do is just go through the basic process. Hopefully we'll get the whole thing done in an hour or so. So you'll need 2 files for this. So open your Blender 2.79. If you haven't got that, go to blender.org. Go to blender.org, and there is a download link. Click the download and just download the latest version. And then you'll need 2 files. You'll need, I'm not quite sure where these have gone for the, let's do an FBX. Right, so you want, let's just move this to a new window. You'll want the FBX starter files. A couple of the, these are the ones for Blender. They should all be there. And what you'll need is to download the one for Blender. So Blender FBX samples version 2. And that's from create.imvu.com/knowledge-base/FBX starter files. I'll just copy paste that into chat. So download the samples, and that'll give you a zip file which will open shortly. Which is still downloading. So you'll get this zip file with quite a lot of files in, and it's this lot at the top. Those are the Blender files, and you'll want IMVU or reorganize the starter files. So you'll want furniture couch, I guess, or oh, there we go, noisy motorbike, furniture animated seesaw, and probably that one. Failing that, because that's a bit disorganized, unfortunately, for some reason. Looks at IMVU with pointy fingers. Home. Blender. Post files. So this is an alternative, and this is probably better for what we're doing, because the starter files aren't clean files. They contain a lot of test content that IMVU were doing when the FBX stuff was being all worked out. So if you go to, I'll copy paste this into chat. So avatar files explained, download the avatar post files, click on that. Open. And this just basically opens up a different set of files. These are all the avatar files, but these are what we call reset files. So they're reset to their defaults. And you'll need female poses or male pose, doesn't matter which one. And then the other one is, I'm not sure if we've actually uploaded it yet. Oh yes, we have. So quick start furniture. So copy that into chat. Download that. Whoops, and that actually started the, that's the actual Blender file. So you'll need this. This is the furniture file. And I'll drop the other one. Whoops. So many files. Right, post file. So you need these two files. So you need the post file, female or male, and the furniture file. Because what we're going to do is turn this. Hi Liana, we're going to make this a simple furniture item. So what we need to do first is establish the size of the object. So we want to add a cylinder, and it'll add it where the cursor is, which at the moment is indicated by the 3D widget. That's this thing with, let me hide the cube. Oh no, turn it to wireframe. That's this thing, widget. It's located where the widget is at the moment, but you can locate it anywhere. What we're going to do is add a mesh and then a cylinder, and it'll drop one into the scene. And then we want to reduce the number of subdivisions. This is 32. Whoops, not that many. Might be able to get away with 12. That's all right. You don't necessarily need to mess around with radius or depth. We can change that later. So primarily you just want to reduce the number of vertices or faces. That's okay. So I just want to flip it around on an axis. So we can do that with the rotate widget. These are your transform manipulators. So you've got translate, which is front, back, left, right. So that's a linear translation. It moves the object like so. Got rotate. So if you left click, grab the colored loops, it'll rotate in the direction of the loop that you've clicked. The same with the widget. So to move, you're left click dragging the arrows, the coloured arrows. So we've got translate, rotate and scale. So what we want to do is just rotate this 90 on the red or X axis, and if you hold Control down whilst you're moving or manipulating the mouse, it'll snap to the grid. And if you look, I don't know how big this is in the stream, but bottom left down here you'll see a number appear. When it says 90, just release and that confirms the move. So what we're doing at the moment is just going to toggle largely between translate and rotate and maybe scale later. But all we're going to do initially is just position this roughly so that we can use the avatar that's in the scene at the moment. We'll use this as a basic size guide. So that's a bit too small. So if you want to scale on a fixed axis, you can use the widget, or you can press the S key, S for Simon, and that'll scale on all axes. So press the S key and just scale it up, and that's fine. Edit mode. Want to make a couple of changes to its size now. So right click a face to select. Switch to transform or translate. And you might notice that the widget is where the cursor is. It should be where the face is. So what we can do there is switch the pivot point, which is this button down here, and we want that to either median or the active element, and if you watch it'll jump to the selected face. And now we can grab we can grab the blue arrow, left click drag, and drag that to make it slightly larger, and that gives us the, where's the picture gone? That'll give us an approximate length from one end to the other, and we can make adjustments to that, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. So again, we can either scale this using the widget or press the S key, and this is the front of the cone. That's about right. Okay. So when you, if you use, let me undo that. If you use the widget, when you left click, that initiates the action, and when you release the mouse button, it completes, so you don't have to do anything else. If you use the shortcut keys, the shortcut key initiates the action, but then you have to left click to confirm and complete the action. So although you do the same thing, you do it slightly, you complete the action in a slightly different way. So what we can do now, right click the back, and what we want to create is an extrusion for this end bit. Well, actually we can do, yeah, so end bit. So that's the rocket exhaust. Let me close that. So select the face, right click, and we want, what we can do here is we can first inset it. So inset face. Whoops, that's a bit. So if you do something like that and the mouse is very sensitive, you can hold the shift key down and it'll slow the motion right down, and it makes it much more controllable. Left click to confirm, and then what we can do from there is extrude. So extrude region, and that will always generally follow the axis. So if you look at the widget, the blue axis is pointing along front to back. So when you extrude a face like that, the extrusion always travels along that axis, which is indicated by the blue line that appears. So left click that. Oh, I know, we've missed something out. I wonder if we could use the box for that. I think we can use the box for that. We've missed the bottom out, so we'll use the cube. So just move this into position. Everything's just rough and approximate at the moment, because all you're doing is blocking things out. So that's the bottom, and we can round off the corners if we switch to edge select mode. So that's these three buttons at the bottom here. These determine what type of element you're selecting. So at the moment it's faces, we have edges, and then we have vertices. So we want edges, and we just want to shift right click the corners. And of course we're using the middle mouse button to rotate around the scene, shift middle mouse to drag, and control middle mouse to zoom. So once you've got those selected, what we can then do is, where's the bevel gone? This is the problem using shortcuts. If you use the shortcut key all the time, you can't see the action or the button. You'll want to see the button. But the problem with using shortcuts is you can't remember where all the actual buttons are. Edges. Oh, there it is. Right, so that's the shortcut we would have used, which is Control B. So I would have just gone Control B and activated it, but that's no good to you because you can't see what's going on. But in using the shortcut key, I can't remember where the actual function is. So it's in Mesh, Edges, Bevel. So what we're doing is just pulling that inwards a little bit. We might shrink that down. So shrink the top down, whoops, face select, S. Make that a little bit smaller. So you can toggle, you can change the size of something by toggling in and out of edit mode. So if we wanted to resize this object, let me undo that. So we wanted to resize this object, so we can do it one of two ways. You can be in object mode and just press the S key and just scale it down. Or, undo that, when you're in edit mode, because you want to scale the whole object, you have to select everything. So select, you need to do it twice because something was selected. Deselect all removes any active selections and then selects the whole thing, and then you can use the scale shortcut and resize. Then we can just reposition. That'll do. So what we can do now is select the cone, go back into edit mode, extend that a little bit and change its size at the end there, so we can either scale it up or down depending on the look that you're going for. So that's what we have so far, and that's the sketch that we're using as a reference. So exit edit mode. So let me just move this back to approximately. Whoops. Dagnabbit. Why is it doing that? Not behaving for some reason. Oh, there we go. Just press the G key. When all things fail, just press G. So the quick shortcut keys for changing the views are, if you're using a full-size keyboard, that's your numpad keys. So that's the 1 is front, 3 is right, 7 is top, and 5 toggles you in and out of perspective. Right, so what we're going to do now is save the file. And then rename these two objects. So that's select the object, and you want object data properties. Excuse me. Object data properties, which is the cube, pink cube button, or orange, depending on your screen color definitions. And in the input box at the top, just type a name. So click to select and then just type and then enter to confirm. Save the file again just save over, because what we're going to do now is use the pose file and append what we've just created. This is a blockout, what we would call a blockout. So this is a rough approximation of the object. So what we've basically done is created a very simple version of the object, because what we want to do is size it, create it relative to the furniture dummies so that we get an approximate size, which we can then append into the pose file and actually create a pose. And this saves you time, because what it means is that you are, as you progress and make your object more detailed, you know that the pose will fit the object. So it's always a good idea just to block things out, make simple versions, and then if you are creating custom poses, import them, or in Blender's case it's append them into the pose file and start creating your pose in conjunction with the basic blockout that you've got. So that's what we're going to do now, append, and then we need to find the file that we just saved. So that's in furniture, and it was called witches. There it is, witches cone. So these are all the Blender files. So you click on that, and when you're appending, it doesn't work like import in the strict sense. It's essentially a file browser, a bit like Windows Explorer or File Explorer, or whatever it's called now in Windows 10. So append, furniture, witches cone, click on the object folder, and there are the two objects that we want, which we named. So you name them, and because we want multiple objects, so that's shift left click, because we named them, it makes it easy to find them. Otherwise this would just be, I think it's cylinder, and this would be cube or block. So select and open, and they open pretty much where they are in the other file. So they're positioned at this cross point, which is grid center. Blender will generally keep the physical position and load it into the file. So all we need to do now is create a pose. So poses, the pose file is already set up to basically pose from the get-go. So as soon as you open the file, you can start posing. And the way you pose is just basically moving individually selected bones, like so. So you right-click select bone, it'll go blue indicating it's active, and then you can just select and move it. So you'll want to generally use the rotate widget of the 3 that we talked about earlier, because it means that the bones will move relative to their pivot points. And you'll also want to make sure that local axes, the orientation, because if you look at the orientation of the widget, it follows the general orientation of the leg. Because if it was in global, it wouldn't, and this tends to make manipulating bones slightly trickier, or slightly more tricky, because you're going against the grain, the natural grain or natural movement of the bone. So local So just create a block out pose. Where's the hip bones? There's the hip bones. And the other one is in there somewhere. I have to reset that. Oh, there it is. Now we can move it. To adjust its height, we don't move the female O3 master root. Never touch that bone. If you need to adjust the position of the avatar overall, use the pelvis node bone, because the way that the skeleton is structured is that all these bones all eventually find themselves rooted to pelvis, which is then rooted to female master root. So if you move the pelvis bone, the entire skeleton moves. If you then move female master root, everything moves. But female master root is used to root, hence the name, or locate the avatar within IMVU. So if you start fiddling around with that, you'll find that your avatar will appear all over the place. So it's best to just use the pelvis node. And then switch between the rotate I should say, if you've got any questions about what's going on, do ask. And again, you just want to block out the position or the pose. Doesn't need to be too detailed. So you're selecting individual bones, and we're going to need to put the handlebars in at some point. But for the moment, we can just create a very basic block out. So that's the shoulder bones. These tiny, tiny bones are the shoulder bones for the avatar. Bend at the elbow. And again, if the bone is being overly sensitive, press the shift key and it slows down. Liana's just saying that she will have to go back over her Blender stuff because the bones look very easy to move about. That just comes from basically just knowing how the skeleton works. And how the bones behave. And it's generally easier to do if you are in local and you are using the rotate widget. Because what you want to do This is the thing with poses. See, the problem is that you're not moving a single bone. So this is what people generally get tripped up over, or they trip over, is that they're just moving single bones, and that's not what you're doing. You're actually moving a single element within a chain of bones. So you have to think about so if you want the knee to bend, as we're doing on screen, and you bend the knee, you have to think about how that bends in relation to what the hip bone is doing, or the thigh bone. So that's the thigh bone, and the hip bone, which is buried inside the skeleton. Because the way that the avatars are set up, one of the biggest problems that people have is that they use the thigh bone because it's positioned where the hip actually is. They use the thigh bone to position the leg, and that's not what the thigh bone does. The thigh bone just twists. If you want to move the leg in terms of kicking a football, or as we're doing here, sitting on a cone, you have to move the thigh bone, the hip bone, sorry, because that's the one that's actually that's causing the actual rotation, or it's replicating essentially the behavior of the hip bone and the top of the leg. The thigh just twists. So that's all you should be doing with the thigh bone, is just twisting, not positioning it as if it were the hip bone. Whoops, need to undo that. And it's the same for the shoulder and the arms. Make sure you're always manipulating the shoulder and or the clavicles. So that's these two bones, depending on the pose that you're creating. So that's our very basic pose block out. And we can save that for later. So save as. Well, Sunny, it depends. Assuming that you create your pose file correctly, it could be that there are, because it does happen when you update the client versions, that the FBX importer exporter breaks. So that is a real thing. So you can use that excuse when your pose doesn't work. You can just say it's the FBX exporter importer. So that's our base pose. So we can go back to, and this is one of the advantages of having Blender, is that you can keep the same file open in two different instances of the application. And what's even cooler, which we didn't do in this instance, is that this is loaded it's loaded an individual instance of the file that we were working on. So if we edit this, if we change this in some way, the changes don't propagate across to this. But when you append files, there is an option to do that. So you could, in theory, append a live version of the project you're working on, so that if you changed it, the change propagates into the post file. Right, so what do we need to do now? We need to make handlebars. So you've got your toolbar shelf on the side here, which you can use to add objects, or down at the bottom, mesh, and then cube. So the best way to do this really is to just model it as the object loads into the scene, and then, because we're going to tilt them at a slight angle, so an easy way to do something like that is to not model it like it's shown. Hang on, let me just do paintbrush. So you might think that you'd have to model it like that, which is trickier to do than just modeling it. Oop, I don't think you can see that. Modeling it like that, which is easier, and then just changing the mesh slightly. Excuse me. And then manipulating the mesh so that this section at the top is moved outwards slightly. So you don't always have to model things in situ as they appear in whatever sketch or concept you're using. So edit mode, grab that, let's drag it upwards. That's all right. And what we can do here is extrude a section at the top. We want a small section like that. So we've got this additional bit at the top. This is where the handlebar will come from. Now, a cheap way to make this look round when we get to that point is to rotate it 45 degrees. So hold the control key down and it'll snap to the snap to increments. Let go when it's at 45, which will be indicated bottom left there. And then what we can do now is select those two faces and extrude those, but because it'll follow the local axis, what you can do is switch the orientation to global, or no, you'll have to do this anyway, I think, actually. So when you extrude, it'll go off to the side like that. So what you can do is right click and that'll reset the extrusion. So the extrusion has actually happened. I don't know how well this will come through on screen, but there are a couple of... Oh, you can't really see them. And they are difficult to select. There we go. There's one. There's two. There should be one there. There isn't. Oh no, it's around the corner. So these lines that are being selected are actually faces. These are the faces of the object that we just, that we just extruded. Dagnabbit. There we go. So what this does is it gives you a bit more control over your extrusions and how they behave. So if you extrude something and it goes off to the side, what you can do is right click and that'll reset the action. It'll complete the action but reset the faces. And then what you can do is change the axis of orientation. Whoops. Need to select the faces and then just pull that out. So we want that to be about the size of the hand. That'll do. Position that at the front. Switch to rotate. And you can either leave the handles tilted like that, or, as we said before, you might need to rotate the ends, and that gives you some basic handlebars. So what you then want is to duplicate this. You want to duplicate it and flip it across to the other side. So what we need to do here is position the cursor so that it's on the center of the grid. So we want the properties panel, so that's the N key, or properties. And we want the 3D cursor, which is here, 0, 0, 0. And it'll drop down to there. So for this next step, we want to do a linked duplicate. So select, duplicate linked, right click to reset, and then object mirror, and is it the y-axis? I think. Nope, x-axis. Dagnabbit. Why is it not mirroring? That should be mirroring. What it should do is flip across to the other side. So if it's not going to behave, then we'll have to do it manually. So make sure you're in global orientation, left click, drag, just rotate it 180. And position it. So grab the two of them. Tilt them forward slightly. Actually, what we can do with this is, so this is a linked duplicate. So what that means is that when this one is edited, or either or, the other one changes. So what we want to do is just join these together. But what we need to do first is make this a single user. So this basically becomes an object that's editable in its own right. And for that, you want to press the U key. And we just want object and data. And then what we can do is select both of them and join them together. And we call this handlebars. Is the stream still going? It looks like it's paused. Okay, everything looks okay. So we've got handlebars. Save a version of this. Save as version 2. And what we can do here, go back to the pose file. So everything is still in place where it was before. We've just added handlebars. That's all. So what we can do is select these objects that we created previously, which are not selecting for some reason. Press the M key. That'll open layers. Just want to move that to a new layer, just out of the way. So we've got the pose still in place, but we've now moved the objects to a different layer just to keep them out of the way. Because what we can now do is append files again, the meshes. So we've got cone base, and where's handlebars gone? To name the right thing. Yeah, handlebars. I need to refresh, so where are the handlebars gone? Dagnabbit. Oh, that's why, because we created a version. Yeah, so watch out for things like that. Ah, there are handlebars. So handlebars, cone base, and cone. Oh, so there's the setting, localize all. So if you disable this, it basically creates a reference of the objects that you've selected. So if you change them, as mentioned previously, if you change them in the source file, they'll also change in the file that you are appending them into. But we don't need to do that. So we can continue with the pose. Now that we've got a set of handlebars in place, we can, whoops, hold the shift key down. We can continue with the pose. So this is the tricky bit. Getting the hand, so even if you wanted an outstretched arm, it wouldn't fit. So you have to fit the avatar to the object. And then in this instance, that means we can use the hand as a basic distance guide. So if we drop the hand so that it's approximately where the handle is, we can then use the elbow to bring the hand upwards and it's in place. And that's how you do that. So I'll do that on the other side. So the hand's not quite in the right place, so shoulder bone, see, it's not quite in the right place, so drop that down by the shoulder and then bring the elbow up, and then it'll put the arm in approximately the right place. You might have to do that a couple of times. So there we go. And you can get quite finicky. I mean, if you want to rotate the fingers and do all of that sort of stuff, you can do that. And it's the same with the leg as well. So let's just make some adjustments to that. Whoops, not that one. So the Blender file is a bit tricky to work with because the bones are all in these weirdly funky positions. But they have to be like that in order for it to work in IMVU. Otherwise they'd break. So what we can do here is, whoops, there we go, cross legs. So let's save that, save as version 2. So next thing, we want to, we'll keep this relatively simple like this, just for the sake of the tutorial, because, I mean, if I were actually doing this as a product under JazzCat's avatar name, it'd be a bit more finished, but for the sake of just getting this done and showing the process, this will suffice. This is fine. So the next thing to do is to texture it. So open up your favorite or not so favorite painting program, and we're going to do a this is a trick. This is a trick for you could say it's advanced texturing, but it's not really. So create a new document, so file, new, and you want this to be so 512 by 256. That's pixels. So that's our base document. So what we're going to do is create a texture that with just one texture that we can use across the entire object. And the way that we're going to do that is, so what have we got? So we look at the original, we've got a brown zone, a black zone, and then we've got the orange white stripes. So use your paint tools or your block fill tools or whatever tools you have at your disposal. In this instance, I'm just going to do some rectangles. So this is the back. I'll just go slightly, not quite black, so black. And then we want orange. White, and then orange, and then white. So let me smush this up a little bit. So you can probably see what we're doing here. Oh, I've got the... Oh, we need an extra stripe, so we'll make the white one a bit thinner. And then an orange one at the end. Excuse me. So, you can probably guess how this is going to be used based on what we've just done. Oh, we haven't done the saddle. We'll have to leave that off for now. Just leave it as a rocket cone. So that's our basic texture. So all we're going to do is save that, save as. Furniture. So that's saving the raw file. You want to keep your layers, and then what we want to do is flatten that and either save as or export that as a, in this instance, just a TGA file, which is a lossless compressed bitmap. You can save it as a JPEG if you want, or a PNG, it doesn't really matter. So we've got our texture. What we're now going to do is UV maps. So before, no, we don't need to do that. So just join everything together. No, actually, let me think. Okay, let's create a material first. So select the cone. Material properties, this will be blank. Well, aside from these buttons. Click new. It'll populate it with some basic settings. You can call this cone for now. And change its color. So click the color field or the sample, that's this box. That'll do. And this is just the basic material. So this is just what's called a diffuse color, as it says there. And this just helps you if you are dealing with or working with a complex scene or a complex object. If you have several materials, you can use the materials as a selection device, because you can assign these to different parts of your object and select those parts of the object based on your material assignments. So we've created a material, whoops, texture properties, which is the checker, that'll be blank as well. Click new, that'll populate, and then we need to make sure that image or movie is selected. And for this we can do open, so click in the image subsection, open, and this will open up our thingamajiggery, the file browser, where we should find our witch's cone, which is there. Where's it gone? Oh, there it is, it's selected. So it's this one here. So left click select, open image. So that's the material, but it's not assigned to the mesh yet. So just to double check, yeah, it's not assigned to the mesh. So we've still got the default or the original cube block that was at the scene center. That's got a material assigned. You can change that later. So the next thing to do is to unwrap this UV maps. So edit mode. And to keep this simple, what we can do is select all. So we might have to do that twice again, once to deselect anything that's already selected. So that's selected everything. And then what we can do here is mesh, unwrap or UV unwrap, and then we want cylinder projection. Let's see how that works. So switch layout. And it's always this huge thing. So I don't know why it does that. Oh, and you might find that if you switch to a different layout, the 3D scene tends to reset. So you've lost, this is called the clipping distance. If you see that the arm and a lot of the contents of the scene are missing, it's because the clip distance, the distance at which nothing is drawn after, is shallow. So we can change that, press the N key, and in clip, just add an extra 0 there. Not there. There, in front of the decimal point. And everything should appear. Switch to texture view so that we can see what we're doing. And then in the UV image editor, click the little picture icon. That's the browse to image. And then we should have our witch's cone in here somewhere. There it is, witch's cone. And it should appear on the mesh, which it does. But it's all mushed up. So we have to adjust the UV map. So to make sure, before you do that, make sure everything is selected. So select, deselect all, and then reselect everything. And then, now this is where it gets tricky, because we're in 2D, not 3D. So that's press the S key to scale, and then the Y key to lock the axes. And because this is a huge UV map, it can get tricky to work with, so we might have to do this a couple of times. So S key, scale, initiates, press the Y key, locks the axes, just left click to confirm that initial action, and then just do it again. Let's see how that's actually unwrapped. So which way is that unwrapped? Yeah, that's not good because that looks as if it's wrapped, unwrapped, front to back. What we actually want is for it to lay out top to bottom. So what it's done is it's essentially it's looking at the object front to back. So unfortunately this means that we are going to have to do some proper unwrapping, and that means using seams, or alternatively what we could do, hold the shift key down. I'll just switch to solid mode to make this easy to see. So hold the shift key down, deselect the front and the back faces. Let's double check what's going on inside there. Oh, that's why. When we extruded this, this went a bit wonky. So because we've got the base of the object obscuring those faces, we'll have to go inside the mesh and delete those, which might be a bit tricky depending on how they've got messed up. So select them, shift right click, press the X key, delete the faces. What has that done? X. That's done something very odd. Whoops. Oh, that's what it's done. Oh, I see what it's done. Okay, so we'll have to undo all of that. So that's Control Z. So we'll have to do a bit of mesh checking. We have to check the mesh to see what's going on. So select the object and hide it. That's the H key. So what's going on here then? Oh, that's twisted round for some reason. That is very odd. Okay, so we have to fix that. Whoops. So we want median point. So median point shifts the cursor to the center of the selection, which is okay for a cylinder. And then we have to look inside, and what we're looking at are these edges. And we're going to rotate this while keeping an eye on those edges. Oh, and it unwraps like an aperture. Not quite sure what happened there. A bit more. There we go. So what we've now got, so that's why the UV map was getting messed up. So let's try UV mapping again. So select all. So the shortcut key for that is the A key. Press once to deselect everything and again to reselect. U key, cylinder. Now let's see what this has done. S, Y. Nope, it's still all wonky. So we're going to have to unwrap this properly. So for that we need to use seams. So switch back to solid to make this easy to see. Edge, select. So if you're stuck on using seams, or if you are having to rely on seams, when you're placing them, what you want to do is try and hide them. Now, looking at the pose file, you're not really going to see the underside of the object because the avatar sits on top of it. That means, or that gives us a bit of latitude where we can hide the seam running along. Whoops a daisy. Yeah. Oh. Right, so if that happens, it basically means Blender is displaying the underside or the upper side of the mesh. So basically you're clicking through the mesh. To disable that so that you are only clicking what you can see, there's this little button down here. So if you watch the lines that are selected, they disappear. So all we want are these lines or edges that run along the bottom, because we're going to hide the seam there. And then just select the edges around the front and the back. And what this will do is it will split the front and the back. It'll split them off into their own little UV section, and will create a split down the center of the cylinder so that it lays out flat. And we'll see this when we unwrap it. But in order for that to happen, we have to mark the seams. So mesh, edges, mark seam. So if I deselect, that's now created an orange. Might be slightly difficult to see with this orange material, but there's an orange highlight down that edge and up the back and around the outside. So what we can now do is, if we unwrap now, don't know if cylinder will work again. No, it'll do. So what we need to do, if you do this, if you use seams, don't use cylinder unwrap, use just ordinary unwrap, and that'll create this. So if we put that back into texture mode, so now that we've got something that we can actually see and work with, so keep an eye on what's happening in the 3D view whilst we're actually working in the texture view. So that's rotate, or that's the R key. So the image editor uses basically the same keys or shortcut keys to initiate an action or a manipulation. So if you want to rotate the object in the 3D view, you press the R key or use the 3D widget, the widget buttons. But because the image editor doesn't have a widget, if you press the R key, it'll do the same thing. Same thing for scale as well. So that's the S key. You do that with, whoops, you do that with the 3D mesh, and it scales it. And similarly, the G key, which is translate or move or grab, that'll grab and move the UV, and it'll grab and move the 3D object. And depending on where your mouse cursor is, it'll depend on which thing. So if the mouse is over the UV image editor, it'll move the UV. If it's over the 3D view, it'll move the object, 3D object. So rotate. Want to make this larger. you might have to do with a cone is, and there isn't a cheap or quick way to do this. Going to have to roughly align each of the UV vertices. So that means you are in vertex selection mode, which is correlation to the same vertex edge face in 3D view, but in the UV image editor you've got this extra one, which is an island, which allows you to select entire UV segments. So we want vertices just so that we can adjust these, and it's just roughly and the same with this lot at the back. So what's the quick way to do this? So we can use our border select and paint select. So if you press the C key, you get this. It's a paintbrush. It allows you to paint select things. So that's left click, and then middle mouse click deselects, and you can click drag and it'll do whatever it is. So click drag left, middle click left, middle click drag, and it deselects. Or there's border select, which is the B key, that brings up this little crosshair and allows you to select groups. And again, this is just quick and dirty-ish. Just so that we can get something done. So this section is this bit at the back, which you can't really see once the base is in place. It's just hidden from view at the moment. So to select a strip of an element, so this strip of vertices, what you can do is Alt, right click, because of the shape of this, we don't necessarily need to be too accurate with our vertical scaling or sizing, because what we're trying to do is get the horizontal working so that we have it follows the pattern. So that's the basic cone, but then we can select the end and just drop that. Oh, hang on, we need to that's it. Just drop that so that the end of that is painted, and then that's the back, which is brown, which is the rocket motor, so we can resize that a little bit, drop that in the brown area, and we've got that covered. Oh, and we've got a bit of overshoot there, so correct that. There we go. Unhide, which is Alt H, the base, and we want to apply the black texture to that. So that's already got a material assigned to it. So rather than creating a new one, we can use the material that we created before, just select the object, and from material properties, select the material. So click the spherical icon and there it is, cone. So that will change the material but not the texture. So what we need to do for that, UV editing, so edit mode, select everything, so that's the A key, and you can see that the original texture is still assigned. So picture icon again, and where is our which cone? Which cone? That cone? No. Which cone? Yeah, that one. And for this, we can, it doesn't really matter what happens to this, so we can scrunch this all up because it's black. And there's the base, bottom of the cone. We can do the same thing for the handlebars. So how have we done that? So default. So there's no material on this, so we need to create one. So object, we're in object mode for this, and that means that when you assign a material, it assigns to the entire object rather than a selection or part of it if you were in edit mode. So material properties, click the browse to, which is the spherical button, cone, and because this doesn't have anything assigned to it already, it'll change color. Now we might want to I wonder actually, so depending on how you wanted, welcome back Liana, depending on how you wanted the handlebars to appear, you could do a couple of things here. So let's say we want the uprights to be white but the handles to be black. What we can do here, edit mode, and then we can select the handlebar faces. So that's shift right click as always. Yeah, that'll do. So we don't yet have a UV map for that section. So press the U key. That's the shortcut instead of going through the menu all the time. Oh, it's kind of done it. But we want to has it unwrapped the whole thing? No, fine, that's perfect. And for this, it doesn't matter that again the UV maps are all smushed up and out of shape because we're only doing a very basic coloration of the object. So we've unwrapped and just squashed the UVs and fit them in this black area, and that gives us our black rubber handlebars. And now we want to unwrap the remainder, and because we've got our current selections active, we can use Control I, and that will invert the selection to everything that's not selected, which we can then UV unwrap again, and that'll give us this, and we can assign our texture to that. And because these are white, we can squash these and drop those there. Or alternatively, we could drop them in the orange bits. And that is the UV mapping of the object. It's very crude, very simple, but you don't always have to make your UV maps complicated. I mean, particularly for objects like this, where you're assigning very simple colors, solid colors to things, all you need is just an unwrap. I mean, ideally they should be done. They should be unwrapped properly, because it helps the helps IMVU to render the object quickly. But it's for purposes that we're doing now, it's okay. So let's save that. Exit edit mode. To now make this a furniture item, we need to join everything together. Right click, right click, right click, and then Control J or join. That'll join everything into a single object. We need to just reposition this slightly so that it's over more or less the center of the scene. And that's okay. 335, what is that? 385. That's fine. Now double check. Right, so for a furniture item, we need this node at the bottom, which is called root. Hang on a sec. Itchy ears. So we need this root node. But at the moment, the cone is not connected to it. So we need to select the object, edit mode, select everything, so deselect just to make sure, and then in object data properties we already have a vertex group created that belonged to the green cube that we had originally in the scene, but that is not assigned to everything on the mesh. But because it's there, we can make use of it. So we can click the assign button and then double check that that's assigned to everything. That's step 1, exit edit mode. And then step 2 is we can do one of two things, or we can do both of these, but what you can do is right click the mesh, shift right click root, and then Control P, or where's it gone? Parent, object, object, keep transform. And what that does now is that if we select and move the root node, it'll move the object with it. So let's save another file. These are restore points as well as archives. 4. Right, so next bit is just to export this to make sure that it works the way that we expect it to. So export. So you want to select both objects, mesh first, root second, file, export FBX. File name is fine. Make sure selected object is active. Geometries, deselect these two. Oh, it automatically deselects that as well. Armatures, deselect, add leaf bones. And then animation, just deselect that lot. So deselect baked animations and it'll deactivate all the other options. Because essentially all we're doing is exporting mesh data. We're not doing anything else. Once that's done, just export. So the next thing to do is IMVU. Create mode. Tralala, which takes its time to open. Derive a new furniture item. So rooms and furniture. We want furniture, which is the default chair. Go. So this is a default. This is the default derivable. So FBX import. Load FBX. Click that. And then we want our furniture file, which is hidden in here somewhere. Which is cone 4. So select, open, and we'll get this file dialog. So we want apply scale. This is the most important one for Blender users. So we want that at 0.01. Cone, that needs to be set to 0. And then we've got our cone material, which is 0. That's fine. We didn't name that properly, but IMVU has picked up and automatically given it a default ID. Then we can import. You'll get an error message of some description. That's okay. Import changes. And then apply changes. And ta-da! It works. So, let's save this. Save as. So we've got a reference point. So, which is cone. Oops, that's all in caps.